So, welcome back. Week 3, our Made to Belong life groups. We're trucking right along now. So, hopefully, you guys are enjoying this, getting a lot from it, and really growing and getting to know some of the people in your group. And I hope it's stretching you a little bit. It's all right to be uncomfortable. And I think sometimes in those moments of uncomfortableness, that's where we grow the most. In that tension that we feel where we realize, hey, we've got some room to grow here. I'm joined again today with Luke Sawyer.
Hey.
And so Luke did an awesome job in preaching week 2. And again, we've had a lot of discussions about this. And so last week in our groups, we discussed the importance of prioritizing our relationships, that practice of priority. We talked about how that looks like intentionality, and really how that about how being intentional is the way that we kind of find ourselves in deep, meaningful, Jesus-centered community. And because if we're not intentional, if we don't make it a priority, we're just going to drift into isolation. And that's really a danger. I don't care how old you are. We live in this society that's designed for disconnection, and it's so easy to find ourselves there. This week, we get into really more of the practical stuff, and we're talking about the chemistry, the practice of chemistry, and what does it look like to develop chemistry with other people. And now, what do I mean by that? Now, there's something amazing that happens when you're around someone and everything just clicks, right? You're around that person and you just get excited and they breathe life into you and you enjoy conversation. It's easy to talk to them. That's chemistry, right? And we all know what happens when you don't have chemistry with someone, when you dread being around them, I hate to say it, but when they kind of suck the life out of you, right? We know what that looks like. So how do we build chemistry? Because that's something that you can actually build and you can develop over time. And we'll talk about how there are certain things we do that kill chemistry, the toxic traits. So today's going to be really practical. So Luke, why don't you kind of jump in and tell us a little bit about what chemistry means to you, what it looks like. Just try to help. Let's paint a picture of chemistry here.
Yeah, well, I think you can think of chemistry. I think of maybe like a romantic relationship that just, two partners are just working. Or maybe you think of like a sports team that everyone is just on the same page and going for the same goal, and it's just clicking, things are working. Basically, I think chemistry is just anytime, like you said, anytime you just look forward to seeing that person, in my life, I think of playing music with people. I grew up and played music with some of my best friends for a really long time. And we got to the point where we logged so many hours playing music together that we could just tell where the music was going. We could tell what the other person was going to play. Or better yet, we thought we knew, but then we were like very surprised at like something new that someone brought to the group, So these are things when I think of chemistry. And what's interesting is our brain actually releases hormones through certain social interactions, like when you sing together at church on Sunday, or you have like a warm hug, when you give eye contact, give high fives, that kind of things. The more you do that stuff, the more our body literally responds and the more chemistry we build. That's kind of what I think chemistry is.
Yeah, so I think that helps kind of understand. And you just know, it's one of those things like, when you don't have it, right? It's easy, but it's a little bit harder to define sometimes. And I think for us, I was thinking about, Jeannie and I grew up doing youth ministry for a long time in the 90s and the early 2000s. And there was this movement, and I call it a movement, like almost every conference you went to, every resource, everything was about busting up cliques of people. Have you heard that word clique? A clique of people. And It's like cliques are this bad thing. They're terrible. And it's kind of interesting because what we're talking about, these deep Jesus-centered communities and these deep relationships, it almost seems in conflict because is that a clique? Is that a bad thing or a good thing? And I think I want to talk about that a minute because there is a way that we can do life and really prioritize these deep relationships and build friendships and have chemistry with one another and not really be a bad thing, not be a clique, not be a closed off community that's inwardly focused. And so to talk about that, I think you've got to look at Jesus a little bit and how he invited people in and gave that invitation. And there was crowds of people followed him, and he was always inviting them to be part of that. So what do you think about that? Are cliques a
Yeah.
bad thing, or is it?
Yeah, it is interesting when we look at the life and the teachings of Jesus. Like, we obviously see that Jesus is open to the crowd. Like, he taught the crowd, he ministered to the crowd, he healed the crowd, literally. And our Jesus-centered communities need to also be open to outsiders. So we don't need to be exclusive to anyone, ever. And we shouldn't discriminate based on what the world tells us, because Jesus came and he knocked those walls down. So at the same time, Jesus had his inner circle of James, John, and Peter, that he did things exclusive to even the other 12 disciples. So we have to ask the question, is Jesus like showing favoritism, or is this a bad thing? And it's like, well, no, of course not. So there's something there that is teaching us, like when we look at the life of Jesus, that they can be held together. You can love the crowd, be open and invited to the crowd, but you can also have your community and your inner circle and not be closed off to the world.
It's a good way of thinking about it. And I think about the word hospitality so much. Throughout Scripture, you just see this word hospitality show up. And we've talked a little bit about this koinonia, the community aspect of fellowship. The word fellowship shows up. The word hospitality. The word hospitality literally means the love of a stranger. Yeah. When you break down that word, and so that's convicting, right? If we don't love strangers, if we don't love those people we don't know, if we're not open to them coming into our community, then we have really, it's been called the holy huddle, right? And I feel like so many times that's the image the church has. It's this closed off community. Everybody knows each other. They're not really open to outsiders coming in. Us four, no more mentality. That's kind of scary a little bit, because you see Jesus, he was always giving that invitation, come follow me, come follow, and he invited, come and see, come and go. And those invitations, even with Zacchaeus, come, let's go to your house. Let's talk about this. See, he was bringing those people from the crowd into his inner circle over time. And so I think, to me, that's really the key, is that, yes, we're open to outsiders, but it's all right, as you said, to go deeper with those people who you do have chemistry with.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it's interesting. We let's talk for a minute before we jump into this next section. There are going to be people in your group that you don't immediately hit it off with.
Yeah.
And there's, I think that's to know that that's part of hospitality. That's part of building chemistry. Is it's going to take some time to get to know people, and we're told to bear with one another, to forgive one another. All of these one another's, don't assume that you're going to be like best buddies the moment you meet. And so there's a process that takes place of intentionally prioritizing relationships, getting to know people, spending time eating and sharing and breaking bread and praying, and all of those things really help develop chemistry over time.
Yeah, I think so we're talking about navigating people that portray like toxic traits. And I think a lot of the times, even before I read this book, Made to Belong, that we're basing this series off of, I only thought of toxic relationships or toxic people as sometimes like, those are the people that are going to be showing like malicious, toxic traits. But the book really points out certain toxic traits that are like way more common in what you're going to see in just like a normal church small group. And we're going to go over these. And I think that you guys will have the same reaction that I did. So let's go through them.
Yeah, there's 4 things here that can kind of destroy chemistry in any group. And when I read these, here's what I want to ask that you do. Don't immediately think, oh, I know someone like that. Oh, I know that. And don't like rib, don't elbow the person beside of you. These are all traits that we all do, that we all can find ourselves kind of slipping into without thinking. The first trait that we've got to be careful about is people who overtalk. What do I mean by that? That just constantly, they don't know how to listen. They just drain the energy out of everybody else because they're always talking. And so maybe you're in a group and, you've experienced that or been in a group in the past that they just constantly babble and just over talk. The second is people who bring everything back to themselves. Again, don't say, oh, I know who that is. I'll just be honest. That's something I have to be careful about.
Yeah.
Like when someone's talking to say, oh, I did something similar to that. And trying to make a connection, if you're not careful, you devalue what they're saying.
Yeah.
And you don't really listen. You're like, you make it about yourself instead of what they're sharing. So that's one you've got to be really careful about. People who criticize often is the third one. People who criticize often, and when you're around them, you feel judged or criticized. They turn everything into, well, you should have done it this way. You could have done it that way. Or why didn't you do this? Or why, and they just complain. It's just that negativity, and they're just not fun to be around. Right. And the fourth thing are people who victimize themselves. And so they believe the world is against them. And these are the people that constantly say, well, you just don't know what they did to me. Or they were just so mean, or they were so bad, or you feel like you're walking on thin ice around them because they're just going to turn everything into an attack. And that's even when it's not meant that way. Those 4 traits, there's a common factor in all 4 of those traits. What is it, Luke?
Yeah, everything is about me. Everything is about them at that time. And what's crazy is that is goes exactly against of the kingdom of God, which is a kingdom where we're supposed to make other people more important than ourselves and consider other people more significant than ourselves. So it's like you could have amazing chemistry with everyone in the life group, but if someone has any of these traits, or maybe they're having a bad night, it can really suck the chemistry out of the room. So
yeah. And again, think about yourself slipping into this, over talking, bringing everything back to yourself, criticizing others, and victimizing yourself. Be careful about those, because that really does. It hurts community. It kind of tears that community apart that you've worked so hard to build. And we live in a culture, I was talking with Luke before this started, where it seems like people like to cut off relationships when we hit a hard time, when we go through some of these kind of toxic behaviors. And Christ calls us to work through them and to bear with one another. So really think about doing that. It's kind of interesting. I think there'll be people that you do really develop this chemistry with. And hopefully your group will be growing closer. But it's all right if everyone is not on the same level of vulnerability and accountability. Yeah. It takes time.
Yeah. Yeah. We also want to point out that Jesus can absolutely redeem toxic relationships. But, if they stay toxic, then you're not going to have any fruit producing at all. And most of the time, those toxic relationships lead to controlling relationships and a false sense of belonging. And I kind of wanted to take the time to talk a little bit about false sense of belongings, like false connections, because I think a huge barrier, and we might talk about this a little bit later next week, but I think a huge barrier to real community is just putting on like masks, putting on false selves, and you'll, instead of connecting with the person, you're connecting with a false person that they're kind of portraying. So we pretend to be someone who we're not, and we'll never actually experience real community if that's what we're doing, if we're just pretending, because we'll never allow people to get to know the real me. So you'll never experience that real Jesus-centered community that we're made for.
Yeah. And that really does hit at some of the topics the next few weeks that we'll be getting into when we talk about vulnerability and empathy and accountability and what those traits are. But I think it's so easy for church people to drift into this, to drift into a lack of authenticity, to put on that false sense of, hey, everything's great, everything's going, everything's wonderful, I don't have any struggles. Because if we admit it, then it's like we're admitting a weakness.
Yeah. So when we talk about, having chemistry, what we don't want you to do is to try to pretend to be someone that you're not in order to get someone to like you. In fact, that's the opposite of what we're saying.
You can't force chemistry. You can't fake it. And just as an aside, we used to at church have a greeting time where everybody stood up and shook each other's hands. And some of y'all loved that, and some of you introverts hated it. But like, to me, that's like a forced way of creating chemistry. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's like, hey, tell everybody, or turn to your neighbor and say this, or shake everybody's hand. You can't force it sometimes. But over time, as you get to know each other, you develop this kind of chemistry, and you work through those toxic things we've talked about. And that means sometimes if you have a strong personality, you pull back. It means sometimes if you're a little more introverted and shy, you step forward, and you get to know each other, and you kind of work through, and you take some risk. And it really is, when we talk about chemistry, it's going to involve some risk to step out of what you're comfortable with and really start working on relationships. So in your groups today, we're going to be discussing what that looks like and how to really build this type of chemistry, how to avoid those toxic behaviors that tear chemistry apart. So any final thoughts?
Yeah, just the one thing that maybe we can apply today to our groups is we talked a little bit about how our brain chemistry works, and they've actually figured out recently that our brain, like the fuel for our brain, is actually joy. We've seen so much depression and anxiety in our culture recently that they're doing all these studies to try to figure out what's going on. And it's interesting that as humans, we thrive when we are joy-filled people. And that's great for us because we have the message of Jesus. And as humans, we have the extreme power of being able to literally give people the fuel that they need to thrive and survive, which is joy. And so when people come into your group, when they first arrive, when you say, man, it's so good to see you, and you make eye contact with them, you might give them a warm hug, you are literally giving them something that is fuel for them. Joy, which is we need to survive and thrive.
Awesome. I love it. Communities of joy. That's what we are. So let's dig in. Have a great discussion today.